It's the Dice Tower's coverage of Gen Con 2012, powered by Game Salute News.
Hey, this is Tom Vassell. Welcome to the final video of our Gen Con series. This is sort of just an overview of the con and some of my opinions of this. When Gen Con says that they're the best 4 days in gaming, I don't know if that's necessarily true. They're certainly the biggest 4 days in gaming. The area is huge. If you're going to go to Gen Con, you better have a good pair of walking shoes because the halls are just gigantic. There was 41,000 people who went this year, and there's so many people to see and talk to and meet, and we did a lot of interviews that you'll be able to listen to on the Dice Tower show with many of the different publishers and designers. Registration lines seem to be faster than they were last year. The will call line last year seemed to be a mile long, was certainly shorter this year. But everywhere you went, there was just gaming. The exhibition hall itself was just absolutely gigantic. And I went through the whole thing, and I'm pretty sure I stopped at every booth, but I spent 5 days doing so. If you're there for 1 day, I think you can just content yourself with the fact that you're really not going to see everything. They had a humongous gaming area. They attached all their halls together, and there was just thousands and thousands of people playing. If you wanted to try out a game, you could get into a scheduled event. I mean, there was just so many things that you could see and do and play games with different people. Some of the things were odd. I'm still not exactly sure what this fake candy store was for. But even if you didn't know what else to do, you could just walk around, follow the crowds, and see what the crowds were seeing. And there was almost always plenty of gaming space. You can see here, these tables are reserved for different things, but if you really wanted to play a game on them, you could, at least until the reserved games show up. And if you don't like crowds, I don't know if Gen Con is for you, but if you just want to play games consistently, there's always something going on, and there's always kind of a cool background effect to doing it while you're there. Some people complain that a lot of the games sold out early while there, and I highly disagree with the people who think that companies are incompetent or deliberately do so, since I work with these companies and they want to do their best, and it's really hard to tell what games are going to sell out and which games aren't. And so really, if you're there to get the new games, you really should show up early on Thursday and snag them as quickly as you can to get them, but even if you don't, there's still tons of games there. This here is the open gaming room where they had a gaming library, and this is it cost $6 a night to go to, but it was a nice area to go to and play games. A lot of people would show up at night. I really liked it. It was almost like a con within a con to some degree, a fun open gaming area. But there were places to game everywhere, all over the convention, whether for role-playing games, for miniature games, for board games. There was really no spot you couldn't game. People were gaming on the floor, gaming at tables. Here we have an auction where you can go and you can... this auction seemed to go on pretty much the whole convention. I didn't actually go there. And then here we have the BGG Math Trade. This I found incredibly amusing. Not to make fun of anyone here, but it was just fun to see people holding up signs with their username on and trading games. And I believe there was more than 100 people involved in it. And I didn't get involved in the trade myself, but it was still a lot of fun to watch and see all those people. And it was a good way to meet people that you might only have known by their username. There were some quote-unquote famous people at the convention who you could get into lines, but there was also famous designers like Richard Garfield, who you just saw. But the convention is all about games. And, I mean, we're talking from super popular games to games that I really don't know what they're called, so please don't email me and say, what was the game at that spot in the video? Some of them I know what they are, but a lot of them, well, this one is awesome. I mean, totally awesome. Coming to a Kickstarter near you soon. But, I mean, you could find games that have just recently been released, to games that are about to be released, to games from just massive publishers like Fantasy Flight Games, to games from small publishers like this Commander-in-Chief that you might not have ever heard from. And so if you just wanted to go and play games, Gen Con was just an absolutely fantastic place to do that because there were so many different games there. I come from a board game background, obviously, and so I like board games and card games, but I still peeked at the miniature games. I still peeked at the role-playing games because there was just so much going on. And there were games that were from small companies that I've just never heard of. There were also, I mean, here we see the Leviathans miniatures and stuff like that. Just looked so neat, and the board was so cool. And you know, I don't know that I would play Leviathans, but this certainly made me want to. And that's the thing about Gen Con, is they got setups and displays that make you want to play games. And little publishers can get a little booth and show off their game right next to the big publisher, and thousands of people will come by. Demoing games, you can go and just fall in line and demo games. You can also set up games for yourself and sign up for them ahead of time. That's what I would recommend doing. If you really want to play a specific game, then sign up for it ahead of time. But if you don't, you can still walk around and probably get into a game and play it with a designer and other players. This was and you'll find games like this one here, this Monsterology, which is a game that works with the iPad. I'm still not sure how the technology works, but it does. I saw them do it. They demo games all over the place. They do it for kids, they do it for adults, and games that you might have heard of for a long time and games that you've never heard of. There are expansions for games that like, for example, the Lords of Millith, that's the only one they had there. And then, of course, there's what I call the spectacle. Giant games, or games that have, you know, a really cool setup. This is a giant Ticket to Ride that people could play. That's the sort of thing you're only going to see at a convention. Mayfair had a ton of games like that, but they weren't the only ones. Here's a giant version of the Guerrilla Games, the space game, where you can see the modules. And, you know, that might be worth going to a convention itself to go see those things. I'm still trying to figure out how these guys roll the dice without knocking everything over.
Faster. 15 seconds left. Go. What word are you spelling?
And then there's the spectacle. All sorts of things that you can see and watch and do. And that's what makes Gen Con fun. And that's about it for this time, folks. I'll see you next year at Gen Con. Go check out a lot of news that we got at GameSaluteNews.com. And also, we're doing a closing podcast on this at Dicetower.com. I hope you enjoyed seeing all these games and all these neat things. Until next year, I'm Tom Vassell.
For more news from the board game industry, visit GameSaluteNews.com. And for more from the Dice Tower, visit Dicetower.com. I'm Eric Summerer. Thanks for watching the Dice Tower.